Grab your bag and pack that bus. It's time for architecture, coffee, and ink. Hello, this is Hollywood C, and you're listening to Architecture, Coffee, and Ink, a podcast dedicated to introducing concepts, detailing out designs, and tackling the architecture you might not realize the meaning behind. I'm your hostess, and I'm here today to start introducing you to the designs that make you wonder why. So I ask you to grab your coffee, grab your sketchbook and pen, and let's begin. So, first and foremost, happy Halloween, everyone. Unless you're listening to this episode in a few weeks or catching up on the backlog, in which case, I hope you're having a happy day. Today, we are going to be interviewing Caleb Brackney in the Romer bus. We are going to be discussing what led to the creation of the bus and what goes into the design and where he is going next. But first, let's talk about this idea of nomadic revival, or what I have monkered as nomadic revival. I haven't seen any official names for it other than schoolies, and to be honest with you, the phrase schoolies solution kind of reminds me way too much of primary school. So, what I'm referring to is the more popular upswing in trends to converting to either small off the grid housing or making schoolies into a home. To clarify, when I'm saying schoolies, that's the term for the idea of the school bus being converted into the home. So it's being slanged as schoolies. Just for those of you who don't know. So overall, you can find references to this trend for several decades, or at least I did by going to my favorite search engine that I don't have permission to say and typing, quote, history of the home buses and, quote, business/small home movement. I eventually ended up on a website from the Simmons College Library and Information Science website where I was able to basically go down a rabbit hole into a series of articles and events, including a mention of one of the first buses that is documented, the Further, that apparently traveled way back in the 60s. As always, the links and information will be posted on my blog page under the corresponding episode post, so just in case anyone's interested. But what is interesting is despite the fact that the tiny movement has been around for so long, the pandemic is really what kicked off the most recent trend. While everything I read, shows that this has been around for a while, it seems like the isolation and the distance that has basically been created has really boosted the desire for travel and has created a really big shift in the values of society. Like I mentioned in the interview itself, you should really check out the Primitive Hut reading by Marc-Antoine Lager to rediscover the age-old argument of what exactly constitutes architecture. I myself am going to go into a pretty deep dive on it, I think a little bit later, maybe an additional post. Now, before this interview kicks off, I do have to disclaimer that if you hear any, quote, voices from beyond, it's not a Halloween joke. The third duel, or the Musketeers, or however you want to call it, of our group, came in part of the way through the interview, so I'm afraid the only thing that he haunts is the fourth floor studios. All right, in this week's episode, I'm excited to introduce my guest, Caleb Brackney, designer mastermind and now Etsy store owner of the Romer Bus, a traveling home first thought of in February 2020. When Caleb is currently one of the duels I go to school with, one of the three of us in our cohort, but he also has a background in interior design before pursuing his current role of Master of Architecture and Master of Landscape that we both are pursuing. So welcome to the show, Caleb.
And thank you so much for that introduction. I'm excited to be on here and participate in this podcast and excited to share part of my story with you today.
Now, for those who may not know or maybe don't follow you on social media, can you explain in a little more depth what the Roamer Bus is? Just basically pretend I've never stepped inside this building or inside the bus before in my life or ever heard of it. It said on your website it was sparked by a friend of yours, right? They did a similar project?
Yes. So I did interior design for my undergrad degree at Harding University and really studied interior design so I could prepare myself for landscape architecture school. And while I was there, my mentor, who was, I think, 3 years older than me, before he went on to architecture school, he built a tiny house and it was actually featured on the HGTV on the DIY network. So it was a really cool project to see someone kind of in my shoes a couple years older than me succeed like that. And for me, that's kind of what it took for me to get the confidence to think I could do something like this. I could make an impact. I could use my passion, my education up to that point to do a cool project. So I went down to Austin, Texas to tour his tiny house, also to tour the University of Texas at Austin's architecture school, and really was inspired through that. Of course, obviously chose the University of Tennessee, the better UT, for grad school. And I've loved my time here, but that was the project that inspired me to do the school bus. And the school bus came about because I was looking for rent or looking for a place to rent and did not want to have to fork out $700 a month or $1,000, whatever it is, and thought, if I have 2 more years of grad school left, how can I use that money to invest in something for my future, but also to maybe practice the skills I've been learning in school and prepare myself better for the future. So in February of 2020, like you mentioned, I found an old school bus on Facebook Marketplace and bought it, and took 6 months to convert it. Of course, it's a challenge, staying within the budget, finding the time to do it. But quarantine really worked out to be the perfect time to do that because, people aren't hanging out all the time. I was able to have a more flexible schedule. And yeah, that's basically what the bus is. It's just a school bus tiny house I converted last year, and I've been living in it for, I think, about going on 15 months. So that's wild.
Wow, that is quite a long time. I haven't realized that it's been that long since 2020. I mean, so you said that it's basically like a little home for you. So how would you describe your favorite part if you had to pick only one aspect of your design that you had to describe? What would you say?
Oh, that's a good question. I think part of the joys of designing and creating my own house have been that the whole space just fits really well with my lifestyle, with the way I like to spend my time. And that's one reason why tiny living, I think, is so inspiring to a lot of people, because it's so flexible in what you can do. But my favorite part would probably just be the open space inside. A lot of times people think a 220 square foot tiny house, it's going to feel like a small studio apartment. Or like in a school bus, they're going to think it's just a really hot space, because they get flashbacks from being a third grader riding in the back of the bus, in the summer or near the summer. So I think just the open space and having all the windows, which I really, from the very beginning, was willing to sacrifice the thermal insulation and keeping all those windows, which are just single pane windows. But that light that lets in, I can open a lot of the windows and let breezes blow through. And so I think that openness, as far as the design side of it goes, is my favorite part.
No, I could understand. So you decided to sacrifice the the double pane instead. Was that a decision that you consulted somebody on, or something that you were just thought through on your own?
So I really just thought through that on my own, because a lot of people who do bus conversions, they'll either cover up the windows and put insulation and then, drywall or wood or whatever on top of that. But a lot of people take those out and just put a few double paned windows, and that's for the insulation qualities. But I think one of the most iconic parts of living in a school bus is that you're living in a school bus. So I thought, why would I sacrifice, the aesthetic of it? Everyone knows a school bus because of all the windows, because of, that layout. And for me, that was worth being a few degrees colder in the winter and a few degrees hotter in the summer. And I really don't regret it. I've spent a winter and a summer in it, and it's nice. I think my body's kind of adapted to it, and thankfully my dog is adapted to it also, and she seems to love it.
That was going to be my follow-up question is what does Ivy think about it? That was my favorite photo that you have online. When I was researching the episode, I saw Ivy like sprawled out across the bed. So just a quick follow-up question that was interesting to me and kind of what I was interested in with your thesis or with my thesis in your project is when you were transitioning into living into the Romer bus, you mentioned a few times that space was extremely important. How would you say that your understanding of space has changed because of your living situation?
Oh, that's a great question also. I think space is so important to all of our lives because everything we do happens in a space. If that's, you go back to the theory of three places where there's work, there's home, there's play, which can be like entertainment or public parks and things like that. And so space to me is so important because that's kind of where I feel control, because the spaces I'm in, I want to, especially the ones that I own or I occupy a lot of the times, to me, I'm less stressed. I just feel more at peace if I feel like I have a good like grasp on the space. And so being able to use like one space for multiple different purposes and having it being really flexible, because you only realistically only cook food maybe twice or three times a day. You only eat 2 to 3 times a day other than snacking. There's a certain amount of time I do homework. There's a certain amount of time I watch TV or exercise. And so realizing that a lot of those things could overlap in the same space and having control of that, knowing where everything is, not having too many things to where you're spending your weekends trying to organize, but that, whenever you're ready to like drop everything and go hike or go camping or do whatever, like you don't have to spend the weekends looking for things. So space to me is like so important because that's kind of like where obviously I live life, but also I think the space you live in reflects kind of some of your characteristics, and really, how you treat what you live in, I think reflects yourself. And so that's kind of how I've lived, and that's why I try to stay organized, and getting rid of a lot of stuff makes it a lot easier to stay organized because, instead of 10 plates, I have 2 plates. If I have more guests over, I can always, grab a few plates or have people pick some up. But I think that's my stance on placemaking in space.
I feel like I need to have you come look at my closet and throw stuff away for me. But so I feel like you kind of already answered my next question. I was going to ask about space in the human body, but I feel like you covered that pretty well. So how pivotal was understanding and reassessing the layout in your design? Would you say that flow played a huge role? I was talking with my class at ITA and trying to explain how like in landscape, we're really obsessed with the flow as we move through space, not as much in architecture. We are obsessed with the flow, but at a different level and different values, really. So how would you feel like that played into your design?
Well, I think having my background in interior design influenced it a lot because, as you mentioned, landscape architects think about flow as far as circulation and people, and interior designers do also. And that's because interior design and landscape architects often deal with people where architects deal with projects. So, architects are more focused, in my experience, on more technical details, and it's not as much about placemaking, which there's, beauty to both sides. Both are equally important. So flow for me, or you go back, I guess, to your original question about how does the layout, how did that really impact the bus? And to me, I started with just wanting to do something different than I've ever seen. So if you type in school bus tiny house on Pinterest or in Google or Instagram, you'll find, dozens and dozens of different homes, and a lot of them look very similar if you can, not see like the patterns or the textures or the colors or the carpet or whatever they use. But the layout is really similar. And yeah, it's cool. That's kind of what inspired me. But I thought there's got to be something else that I can think of, especially having my background in design. As a responsible designer, I thought, what if there's a way I could just kind of blow this out of the water and just kind of rethink how space could function inside of, a 7.5 foot wide school bus. So I started taking inventory of what I do often, and I realized I'm in the kitchen a very small amount of time of the day, and I'm in the bathroom a very small time of the day. So I wanted those two spaces to be out of the way. And if you look online, most school buses have the kitchen in the middle and then the bathroom right in the middle before the bedroom. And I thought, this doesn't make sense. Why would I want to walk through two spaces that I don't use that much? And I don't want to be tempted to grab a snack out of the fridge, or, if you see chips in the cupboard. So for me, the living space, I wanted it to be the main part. And I think it's really, that idea and that concept has really taken off because I've sold hundreds of copies of the Roamer Bus floor plans on Etsy, because people realize, wow, there's something special about this. And it's not necessarily the exact layout that most people want. Like I said at the beginning, everyone's different. Everyone has different priorities in their life and different lifestyles. But I think it's just kind of showed a way to use space differently. And if I did it again, maybe my life now is a little bit different and I would change one or two things. But for now, it seems like it's working great.
All right. So moving on to what I'm really interested in, not that I haven't been interested in the past, I found it absolutely horrible, but I'm really interested in the changing values of ownership. Particularly, I feel like the bus, and as a whole, the whole nomadic lifestyle, really shows that we've kind of changed our values as a society. I'm going to call it a revival, a nomadic revival, basically.
I love it.
Awesome. Let's start teaching that in class. But how do you feel that the bus has allowed you this freedom or to experience that change? I mean, World War II, we kind of switched over to the picket house and the fence and 2.5 kids. So what do you think the bus teaches about that?
Well, I think that's one of the most exciting things about modular infrastructure and taking that over and repurposing it, or rethinking how the home functions, or the house functions, not necessarily the home. And that's why I think it's taking over the internet on TikTok or YouTube or whatever, wherever you get information from. And especially with the pandemic hitting and people being able to be more flexible with work schedules, or being able to, do what we're doing now, like having a podcast virtually, it opens up a lot more opportunities for people to travel. I think, in American society, exploration and travel has always been exciting. Like people always go to the beach or to the mountains for breaks, it seems like. But a lot of people just couldn't afford that due to schedules being really tough with school or work. So nomadic cultures kind of offered a really unique opportunity. And then at the same time, there's the intersection of the housing market right now being crazy. And, young adults, most people can't afford to buy a house right now, if you can even find a house. Especially out west, like in Colorado, basically anything other than a starter home starts at $600,000 or $700,000. And as a mid to upper 20-year-old, it's overwhelming thinking of making a commitment to buying a house that it's going to take you a long time to pay off, most likely. So tiny living has really opened the door, I think, for people to realize I could spend some time and small financial investment and own something, and kind of figure out, what city do I want to live in? I could park the bus, in a city, and if I don't like it in a year, I'm not tied to a lease, or I'm not tied to making, mortgage payments. And I think that's really attractive to a lot of people. It's certainly attractive to me. And it was another reason I wanted to, have a tiny home that I could move, because, that's another part of the freedom. It goes back to a previous question you asked, but having the freedom to move and not be tied to a certain place. And, maybe I feel more tied to relationships and experiences instead of an actual home or a front yard. So that's I think why it's so attractive nowadays.
So I guess the next big question is, what is next for the Roamer Bus? Where are you moving forwards to?
Yeah. So I get that question asked a lot because people are always thinking, what's next? What would you do different? What's your next remodel going to be or whatever? And I think I really want to try to focus on getting solar, like putting a solar system in, like on the roof, just for power, because that's one thing I'm conscious of is I'm still using, you know, like I have to be plugged into like 30 or 50 amps, or the bus has to be running for me to power things inside the bus. And I do have a solar generator with 200 watts of solar power, but I would love to bump that up, like 5 or 6 times that. So I could be a little bit more off grid and not be as tied to having to stay somewhere with hookups, especially in weather that's a little bit tougher. Like this time of year in October, it's pretty easy not to use a lot of power because I'm not running the air conditioner or heat. But in the summer, I'm definitely aware that I'm using the air conditioner a lot. Part of it's because I have a dog, so I have to keep her cool throughout the day. But I think power is a big one. And then I guess my next project, if we want to transition to that, is converting an old pontoon boat into a tiny floating houseboat. So that's really addressing, kind of hoping that the inspiration that I feel like I've given to this community through the bus, I can start moving it into a direction that I see our future heading as a country. Because with sea level rise, with people, the challenges of finding land, there's a lot of water out there. And if there's a way to have villages of nomadic communities able to move around on the water, that could be a really cool opportunity. And maybe now is not the time that everyone's going to do it, but at least, in a decade down the road or whatever, people can start looking back and thinking, oh, this was a project that was really cool. Let's, mimic something like that to do an affordable floating tiny house. And hopefully that can address issues of density in cities. And even if it's temporary housing due to natural disasters, or, ways to house homeless people on these, cool villages that are floating, they can move seasonally, so you're never dealing with really harsh weather, hopefully. And I still have a lot to research and learn about that. But I think, providing some education and information and inspiration is where I see my trajectory going.
Well, that's very inspirational. I was going to ask if you were going to, focus on a whole new set of issues with instead of the trade-off of, the amount of thermal between the windows. Now you've got to worry about hurricanes and sea sprouts, water spouts. Oh my goodness, I can't believe I forgot what that is called. But is there anything about both projects that you feel like nobody asks you and you are dying to answer?
Oh, that's a good question, because I get a lot of questions I get some questions all the time that are the most ridiculous questions that I think, how are people wasting their time asking me this? Such as, people will ask me, what side of the bus is the freshwater tank on? And I'm like, well, it's on, the left side of the bus. And they ask, does the bus tilt that direction, or do you feel it gets hard to drive because there's more weight on that side? And I'm thinking, this is a 30,000 pound vehicle. A 50-gallon freshwater tank does not weigh more than, 10 athletes. Think of all, there's 65 people on a bus. Is there ever the perfect amount of people on the left and right side? No. It can take the weight. So questions like that drive me crazy, because that just fills my DMs and I'm having to filter through. But a question that I'm dying to answer that I don't get asked ever. I've never really thought about that. That's a really good question. I would say it would do something along the lines of, I really don't get questions asked a lot about sustainability, I think. A lot of people are interested in the practicality of it and aren't really considering going tiny to leave a smaller footprint. A lot of times, maybe they're trying to live more minimal, but that's just due to they're tired of, like I said earlier, sorting through things on the weekend or organizing. But it doesn't seem like, at least in my experience, a lot of people are interested in how can we use like recycled things for a sustainable purpose instead of just budget. And I would hope in the future that starts becoming more on people's radars, because for me, learning how to be more sustainable was a big part of it also. Obviously, budget was a huge hurdle I had to get through, just doing the whole thing for $10,000. And that was really only thanks to sponsors who would send me products to put in it. And it's constantly, the bus is looking more beautiful every day, just thanks to things being sent to me. So it's still within the same budget, but it's like upgrading just due to people sending me things. But yeah, I would say regarding sustainability, and I hope through the boat project, I can have that more on the forefront of what I'm doing, and maybe speak more to the benefits that recycling and upcycling things have on the design, instead of it just being, nice to the wallet.
So, would there be something that you would want to target particularly in sustainability, like a particular aspect, or maybe just like you are just really driven about either water conservation or recycling, or just if you had to pick one?
I'm a huge relationship person, as far as I think relationships for me, help with if it's anxiety or like stress levels and just being in contact with people. And I know it's hard now that a lot of people are still working remote or doing things like that. But I think the part of sustainability I appreciate the most is repurposing materials that are already being used, because our landfills are just full of different products that people get tired of, or it's the wrong season, so they get rid of. And I mean, I love like the Facebook Marketplace community, because you're able to buy things, one, a lot cheaper, so that's attractive, but two, when you go pick up things, you get to meet really interesting people. And I've met dozens and dozens of people from Facebook Marketplace. That's where I bought the bus, that's where I bought the boat, that's where I bought a lot of the things inside of it. And I think, sharing your story, and people really get excited about passionate people. And there's so many different things I've bought on Facebook Marketplace that I showed up to the person's house, kind of introduced myself, told them kind of what this product is going to go into. And they've been like, just take it for free. I'm so happy to be a part of your journey. I'll make sure to follow along. And I think that community building makes that aspect of sustainability like full circle for me, because it's not only taking care of the environment, but it's also taking care of each other. And that's, I think, by far like my favorite aspect of it.
So, when you're talking about community and networking, would you say that it has allowed you a lot of freedom having a start to your conversations? Like you have something to bring people over in your passion that you kind of mentioned before. So using that as a branching off point, has that made it a lot easier to find people? Do people find you, or is it more you reaching out to people, or kind of a mixture of both?
And you're talking in regards to like
just sponsors? Like no, not sponsors. Just like getting to know people, network, a larger community of people as you kind of travel through the bus, not sponsors in particular.
Yeah, no, that's a good question too. I think by far it's helped my confidence with approaching people, because it's a cool story that a lot of people share some interest in, and most people don't have really hard feelings against it, because at this point it's still trendy. It's it's kind of like a cool thing to do, and it's really opened up a lot of doors, especially traveling this past summer, because I would be going through Las Vegas or going through Colorado and put on my story, hey, I'm stopping here for the night if anyone wants to show me around or grab a drink or get some food. And people would just DM me back and be like, oh, I live 20 minutes from there, I would love to show you around. And then spending days with strangers in a way when I first meet them, and how quickly the connection comes, because that type of lifestyle is so contagious in a way. And there's a lot of storytelling that takes place, and just a lot of really good people in the community. And it's helped me tremendously with networking, because now I know people in probably all like 50 states and around the world due to it. And it's, they're acquaintances. Some have turned into really good friends who will still text. And, if they're traveling through town, I'll see them. But it's all just because of the school bus. And it's crazy to think that, I've stayed at strangers' houses because they followed me on social media and I needed somewhere to crash for the night. But I think it proves that most people are a lot better than, what we may expect. So, yeah, no doubt.
So I guess I have to ask this question. What is your favorite place that you have ever traveled to with the bus?
Ooh, with the bus. So I really don't travel with the bus that often because one, diesel is pretty expensive and the bus gets like 6 or 7 miles a gallon. And really, since I live in it every day, there's not as much of a draw of like, let's take it to the mountains for the weekend, because I already stay in it every night. So if I go to the mountains, it's fun to go tent camping or get an Airbnb or stay with friends. So I would say that, I think my best stories of traveling with the bus are just going to friends' houses. Like, and you've been a part of some of those, or probably all the parties that we've had where, we'll take it, or I'll take the bus to a friend's house and stay there. And it's, been really fun to have people just like come together and, it's just a piece of it, but it could also be a piece that, maybe like invites a few more people, and then in turn, there's like better community. And yeah, so I think it's more about people than places as far as traveling in the bus. But I also love traveling, obviously, so.
Did you know that when you were going to be designing the bus, that the community was so important, that was going to be your primary focus, or is that like an inadvertent side effect?
No, it was the best side effect ever, though, because when I started the bus, I kind of had to motivate myself to work on it because, people were interested in it, but they thought, what are you doing buying an old school bus? It's just, it's what, 25 years old, and, you don't really know what you're getting yourself into. You don't know how to do all the different projects that it's going to take. You don't have the materials. And I think, so the momentum started by myself just being really motivated. But then after a few weeks or after a few months, and people really started to get excited about it, I used that momentum to power me through to finish it, because it's hard to keep up your own, along with other responsibilities you have in life and relationships. It's hard to keep up with, that passion and that motivation to work on it every day. So I really just used other people's, excitement for it to power me through. And that's another part why I love the community so much, because it's really like a team lifestyle. And, the bus, maybe it's like my bus right now, but it wouldn't be my bus if it wasn't for other people sharing their passions or coming and helping me for a day or asking me how it's going, and which, helped me finish it.
Okay, so another aspect that I was really interested in is probably driven by our professor, who I will not name drop because I don't have their permission. They were talking about the relationships between human and nature. And like we read The Primitive Hut by Laker in 1753 or whenever the date was, where it's talking about the shift in how we kind of like moved into design and how this kind of relates with architecture. And I'm pretty sure it caused a rift. What was it, between the utilitarians and the rationalists? I don't remember. Please don't at me if I'm wrong, guys. But basically, it's just like breaking down architecture into its most basic form. So if we had to boil down everything into solely human needs, which is like, food, shelter, and warmth, how do you feel that the Romer or your future project is going to handle this?
That's an excellent question. I think, well, that's really well said. I think vinyl, and I'm going back to like these thermal qualities that benefit my life, especially knowing that, my ritual now is opening like the side door and then opening a window across from it to let a cross flow in, and opening the curtains because light is huge for me. And light and ventilation, I think, are two things that all humans need to really be able to function to their potential. I mean, there's activities, if it's gaming or other things that may not need as much like light, for example. But I think the roamer has done a really good job of providing, I think, essential human needs of light and then like circulation, airspace, or air ventilation. And I hope my future, I'm able to provide that in all the spaces I design, in all the parks I create, or maybe the tiny houses I build, because I think those are just huge psychologically, but then also physically. I just feel more at peace. I feel more motivated. I feel more productive if I'm in spaces that I have light and ventilation. So I would say those are the two, even more than like temperature, more than other things. I could go into like how textures and colors affect mood and affect productivity also, but at the core, light and ventilation.
I'm kind of imagining you sitting there with a bunch of like color samples just like pasted against the wall.
I would love to.
With all these notes. So I guess a quick follow-up that I was thinking of, when you mentioned the city on the water as a potential like solution for homelessness, quote unquote, I know that homelessness is an issue that we will, like, it's a very, very complex issue that has a lot more to it. But in a theoretical thought experiment type way, how would you see a series of boats coming together, houseboats, just for lack of a better phrase? Like, could you describe how you would, what areas you would target to help people with through design?
Yeah, no, that's a good question too. So with the DIY culture being so inspired by like people's own passion, I see it, I see it happening the same way these like gatherings happen out in the desert or in Florida, where a lot of van life, bus life, communities come together and everyone's parked up next to each other. People are touring each other's homes. People are sharing food together. It's very community based, where, some people may be good at, some things and some are good at other things and they just share. And so I think the aspect of design comes in by providing, if it's like a layout or if it's the opportunity for people to park next to, park their houseboat, we'll just use like that terminology, next to each other, and then having public spaces between them that when you feel safe, but you also feel connected and involved with people, because there's so many health and then also emotional implications for being in a community. I think that's why people are involved in gyms or in church or in children, even like if your kids play sports, like there's a network there of like families who are connected in each other's lives. So this could be a way that maybe you can like move your boat and move around. It's not necessarily like a static, but it's also like a breathing community that you're moving around, you're meeting people, experiencing life with them, but then you can move to the next village or to a different part of the village, and you're not tied to space, or like there's not trees you're having to dodge around, but it can be more orthogonal, I guess. So that's kind of where I see it going, but I still have a lot to think and read about before I make that decision.
So where would you take your designs if you, in the future, get your license, get practiced, have $1 million to do your dream ideal firm, set it up the way you want with you in control? What would you like to focus on?
At this point, I think my niche is definitely the tiny home community, because one, I have a lot of connections within it. I have connections to a lot of companies and brands that are marketing towards that community. And then also people who are, working into becoming, building their own brands to cater to the community, which is kind of what I've done with the Roamer bus. So just because I feel like that's kind of my like specialty at this point, and I feel like I've had a decent amount of success in it in this last year and a half. It's, I think confidence and then seeing some success really helps in, it's going to shape my future no matter what. But I think that's probably the niche I'll go into, is creating highly functional living spaces And it's not maybe just for DIY nomads. It could be for other people who, if they're just traveling into the States, or building cities that can, house more people, but house them in better ways. If it's moving into the water, or if it's, even moving upwards, just having a better understanding of how space affects, one, relationships like we've talked a lot about today, but also access to like light and ventilation and other things that contribute to a productive life.
So before we sign off the interview, where can everybody find you, your store, or your socials if they want to learn more about the Romer Bust and the future of it?
Sure. So on Instagram and TikTok, it's at Romer Bust. That's ROAMER Bus. And then if you're interested in seeing the floor plans or how I did the electrical or plumbing, or if you want to see, like a materials palette or a schedule of, the order I did the bus in, and even some social media tips are on there. You can find those on Etsy just by searching Romer Bus. You can also type in just to Google like University of Tennessee college student school bus, and it'll pop up there too. But I love, getting DMs and answering questions for people. And also I've got a website, romerbus.com. It's also romeroutpost.com, where you can see a lot of different pictures and different products I use in the bus. And hopefully that, may inspire you or just educate you more on some of the benefits of this lifestyle and how you can live better with less things and, aspire to live a life of no roots and no limits like I'm currently trying to do.
Well, thank you once again. And thank you for talking about the nomadic revival. I'm going to make that a thing. As always, I'll make sure to take links for everybody in the show notes, just in case anybody wants to follow up with that. So everyone, I highly encourage you all to take a peek, and we look forward to following you as you complete this new project.
Thanks so much. I had a blast talking to you today.
Thank you once again for tuning in. Once again, a huge big thank you to all of my listeners, and a quick call of action. Please rate and review, share with your friends, your neighbors, and your family, and your professor, whomever you think needs some architecture in their life. We again have a Facebook page and a private group, both of which are under the same name, Architecture, Coffee, and Ink. Just come give us a like, stop by to kind of check out some of the episodes. The answer to the question, who is the host, if you would like to join the secret group, is Hollywood, just like the city. And the second question is just your opinion. I might just use that second answer as a recommendation for a show with a little shout out. If you want to either be featured or have a case study suggestion, or perhaps just want to share a story of your favorite design or experience, you can reach me at Architecture, Coffee, and Ink. The website is architectureinc.design.blog, and my Twitter is at Hollywood Conrad, and Insta is Hollywood.Conrad, because I live to make everyone's life very difficult. Everything will be linked in the show notes, including my incredibly long URL. You can also email me at architecturecoffeeandink@gmail.com, all spelled out without the ampersands or the comma. The theme song is again by me and GarageBand. Just remember, today is a double feature, so if you would like to enjoy a second bonus episode that is entirely Halloween themed and slightly different from your usual dose of me, check out my bonus Halloween episode that I'm actually releasing at the same time. It will be a little bit more thematic, and if it goes over well, it might be something I would consider doing occasionally. But either way, happy Halloween, happy All Saints Day, All Souls Day, Guy Fawkes Night, Mischief Night, Samhain, or El Día de los Muertos, Day of the Dead. Sorry about that pronunciation, whichever you celebrate. May your coffee mugs be full and your ink wells never run dry. Bye.